Deciding where to do your open water course is possibly the single most important scuba related decision you will make. This is the foundational skill we're talking about here. Get it right and a lifetime of adventure waits you. Get it wrong and it can put you off the sport sometimes for good. Now, before we start, the main thing to remember is that diving is not a commodity. You're not buying alus in the market for like 50 rupees a kilo versus 45 rupees a kilo. The quality of instruction matters significantly. Just like with schools. For example, you can have two schools teaching the exact same curriculum, and yet one school is going to be better than the other. Diving works the same way. You can have two instructors teaching the exact same course and meeting all the requirements, and yet at the end of the course, you can have two vastly differing outcomes in terms of the students and how well qualified they are in terms of being able to dive safely and comfortably. So how do you pick the right dive center to learn to dive? Well, that's what this video is about. Let's start by talking about factors that matter. And there are four main things you should consider. The first one is the duration of the course. In other words, how long does the course actually take? There are places that complete the entire open water course in as little as 2 days. There are places that do it over 4 days. And there are places where you can actually spend a couple of weeks doing the course, doing 1 or 2 sessions a week, 1 or 2 sessions a week, and so on and so forth. The main thing to remember learning to dive is that the more time you spend in the water, the better you get. And the second thing to remember is that it's not just the amount of time you spend in the water, it's also the duration. For example, 2 4-hour sessions spread out over 2 days is sometimes more effective at learning than one single 8-hour session. So when you're checking with the dive center, the first thing to ask is how long is the course? At minimum, it should be at least 3 days with 1 long confined water session and 2 days of 2 dives per day. Even better is if it's over 4 days, where 2 days are allocated to do the confined water training and 2 days are allocated towards doing your open water training. The second point to consider is how long are the actual dives. In the open water course, you have to complete 4 ocean dives or 4 open water dives. But the thing is, the duration of these dives can vary quite a lot. Some places do dives that are about 20 minutes long. So you go down the water, you spend about 10 minutes doing exercises, another 10 minutes swimming, and then you're done. Other places spend about 60 minutes in the water for each dive. So 10 minutes of actually doing skills and then 50 minutes of diving. In those 50 minutes, you will dive around and look at stuff and actually enjoy seeing marine life. And more importantly, by being in the water, by swimming, you will actually develop your buoyancy skills and a general sense of comfort in the water. Remember, the way you get good in the water is by being in the water. So the more time you spend diving in the open water course, the better a diver you will be. The third item has to do with additional training sessions if need be. Not everybody learns at the same pace. Some people may need more time to get comfortable. So what happens if you do? In some places, you have to follow the schedule. And if not, you get a little bit of time to practice, and then, if you can manage it, great. If not, oh well, too bad. Other dive centers will give you additional sessions as and when needed. Sometimes there's a fee, sometimes there's not. So it's worth checking how your course is going to be structured. Another point to clarify in this matter is what happens if there's a disagreement between you and your instructor about whether or not additional sessions are needed. For example, you might think that you need more training in one skill. The instructor might think you're okay. What happens then? Ideally, a good dive center will ensure that both the student and the instructor are comfortable with the skills and will provide additional training until this condition is met. So make sure you check with the dive center about what happened in this case, because this is really important. If you need additional training sessions and you don't get them, you're not going to be so comfortable in the water and you won't enjoy your diving as much. The last part to think about is any special needs or requirements you have. Maybe you've gone diving once and have had an issue that's made you very nervous about one particular aspect of the skill. Maybe you feel a bit pressurized in performing skills with other people watching, or whatever. If you have any special training needs or requirements, make sure you discuss it with the dive center and that they're able to accommodate it to your satisfaction. Now let's talk about 3 factors that do matter but not as much as you think. The first is student to instructor ratio. Now, of course, all else being equal, you do want a class where the ratio of student to instructors is as low as possible. But that's not the only thing. The quality of the instructor also matters. Personally speaking, I would rather send a friend to a class with a good instructor who's teaching 4 students at a time versus a poor instructor who's teaching 1:1 or 2:1. Now, obviously, there's a common sense limit to it as well, right? If it's 1:1 or 2:1 versus 4:1, that's less of an issue. If you're talking about 2 students per instructor to, let's say, 12 students to an instructor, even if there's a couple of dive masters helping out, that's a different thing altogether, right? So the long and short is, yes, you do care about ratios, but don't get obsessed by it. The second thing that probably doesn't matter as much as you think it is a review from friends, especially if those friends are recently certified divers themselves. Now, again, I'm not saying that these reviews are useless. I'm merely pointing out the fact that a newly certified diver doesn't have the breadth of experience to objectively decide on how good their course was. There are other valuable takeaways you can get from this feedback, such as how the instructor's teaching style, or actually very specific objective facts about the class, as in did they feel rushed, how long were the water sessions, etc., etc. But don't just rely on a friend's recommendation to pick a course. Of course, if the friend is an experienced diver or an instructor who's providing unbiased advice, that's a different story altogether. Key emphasis, unbiased advice. The third thing that doesn't matter as much as you might think is the experience of the instructor. And I can hear some of you going, hey, how can that be? Of course, you want a more experienced instructor. And that's true. You're right. I mean, experience is always a good thing. However, let me use an analogy. You don't necessarily need a Nobel laureate to teach a high school physics class, do you? What you need is an instructor who's committed, patient, and willing to make sure that the students learn what they need to do. While experience comes really handy when it comes to teaching things like professional courses, at the open water level, you don't necessarily need a super experienced instructor. What you need is someone who's patient, committed, and really invested in producing good divers. So long and short, don't worry so much about the experience level of the instructor. Focus more on whether or not they're actually invested in teaching you to the best of their abilities. Now let me tell you 3 things that should not be on your radar when it comes to picking a dive center. The first is price. Now look, I know price matters. We're not all made of money. In case you are, please buy some equipment or do some training with us. I'm kidding. The reality is that price does matter for most of us, and I'm not saying it shouldn't. However, as I said, learning to dive is a foundational skill. Getting it right is really important. If you don't get it right, it's going to put you off the sport entirely. So is saving a couple of ₹1,000 that important? Probably not. It's far more important that you look at all the criteria I talked about earlier. Make sure you find the right dive center. And of course, if you're down to 2 or 3 dive centers and they all seem equally good, sure, at that point you can use price as a criteria. But for God's sakes, do not book a course simply because it's the cheapest option available. Good training costs money. Low student to instructor ratios cost money. A good instructor earns more. Long water sessions, long open water dives, all of these cost money. A dive center selling courses at a cut rate price is cutting corners. It's just you don't know where. Play it safe, pay for quality, get your training done right, and like I said, enjoy the sport for a lifetime. The second thing that absolutely doesn't matter is the choice of agency. We get so many people asking, oh, do you do PADI? Now, PADI is a perfectly good agency, but it's not the only training agency out there. There's SSI, there's NAVI, there's SDI, there's RAID, and there's several others. And here's the thing, they all teach the exact same thing. There are very minor differences. I have a video on the difference between different agencies, and there's a link to that in the bottom. You can go through that. But the long and short of that is, the agency doesn't matter. All agencies teach the same standard. What matters is the instructor. Does the instructor actually get you there or not? A good instructor will teach a good course regardless of what agency they're teaching. A bad instructor will make you a poor diver, again, regardless of the agency that they're teaching. Focus on the instructor, not the agency. And the third thing that you should not care about is whether the dive center has a 5-star rating or a diamond rating or any of that. I ran a 5-star dive center for 20 years. I can tell you this, that is just a marketing term. A 5-star rating simply means that you meet a certain minimum number of certifications a year and that you're exclusively teaching that agency. The same holds for a diamond rating. These are marketing terms, don't fall for them. Again, focus on the instructor. That's what's going to make you a better diver. And so in summary, there's 2 takeaways I'd like you to get from this. 1, diving is not a commodity. Focus on quality over price. 2, selecting a dive center doesn't have to be rocket science. There are certain objective criteria that you can follow up on with the dive center, and these will help ensure at least a certain minimum threshold of quality. Good luck, and if you have any questions, let us know.